I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for day 2 of the virtual academic workshop. Today, we're going to focus on how to succeed in an academic position. And we're going to start with a keynote from Professor Stacey Finley. Stacey is the Gordon Marshall Early Career Chair and an Associate Professor of Biomedical Engineering at University of Southern California, where I am. She received her Bachelor's in Chemical Engineering from Florida A&M and her PhD in Chemie from Northwestern, and then went on for a postdoc at Johns Hopkins. She works in computational modeling of biological and chemical systems, and I'm going to hand it over to Stacey.
Thanks, Andrea, for the invitation, for the introduction. I'm really excited to be able to give this presentation. It looks like, again, when we switch to this, I can't share my slides.
Let me do that real quick for you.
Okay. So yeah, this is a great, it really is an honor to be able to speak about what is success. I'm still figuring out some of that myself, but what I'm excited to tell you about are some of the pieces of advice that I received, and also some ideas about how to be successful in this career, which we know can be pretty difficult. And it's always helpful to sort of get some insight as you're considering and working on putting together your faculty applications. So what I want to start with right from the beginning is just to establish some ground rules, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. You can sort of think of these as disclaimers. So the first is that the definition of success is not the same for everyone. Even if you're on the same kind of a career trajectory at a research-intensive institution or a teaching-focused institution, it's not going to look the same for everyone. So that's something just to keep track of and remind yourselves of. The second that I want to make sure that we are sort of agreeing on is that the path to success does not look the same for everyone. So I'm going to give you some ideas and some perspectives from things that I've learned, but you should take this as one data point and get lots of other data as you sort of figure out what success is and how to achieve it. Thirdly, the time it takes to reach success is not the same, right? So we start maybe on the tenure track, or you start at your faculty position and you have this idea about how long it will take, and you're comparing yourself to your colleagues and your friends from grad school and postdoc. And so it's just true that it doesn't take the same time for everyone to reach the same level. And then lastly, and I think this is a big one, considering the climate that we're in, both in terms of the health care in the country, the political landscape, all of these different things, just being home and quarantining right now, saying that success in your career does not equate to success in life, right? So we're thinking about really two different axes, and they certainly overlap and coincide at different points, but I just wanted to point that out as well. So what I think is a good common ground, and one goal that I think that we would all consider to be important, is how I'm just defining success in your career as promotion and job security and tenure. So this would apply whether you're pursuing a faculty position at a research-intensive institution or an institution focused on undergraduate education. I think job security and promotion up the faculty ranks is really a mark of a successful career in academia, and in both of those routes. So that's where we're really putting our pin to start off our conversation. So I think now that we've established this broad definition of success, I want to focus in on how to get there. After powering through grad school and pursuing your postdoc research position, and then you're putting together these really strong faculty application packages, you finally land your first position, you might expect the path to promotion to look something like this. So approximately linear, a defined timeline, just a few missteps along the way. But let's be honest with ourselves, right? This is really what the path to success actually looks like. It's winding, it's long, it's unpredictable. There are high highs, there are low lows. The same day that you have your first grant funded is the day that your paper is rejected. And maybe your first paper doesn't even get accepted until well into your third year. At some point, you might have to fire a postdoc. Your first grad student quits. you're going through all these grant applications and nothing is getting funded. Eventually you start to have more momentum and things are going well, and then your dossier is due. And finally, in year X, and X can be any number greater than 1, you get promoted. And so the question then becomes sort of what specific things should you work towards to achieve success, and how could you avoid some of the common missteps? So in thinking about what I would talk about this morning and present, several things came to mind in terms of having to do with getting promoted. And these include demonstrating productivity, gaining recognition for your work, developing successful trainees, using your position to effect change. And so what I want to discuss is really talking about each of these components in turn, and then thinking about where some missteps can occur, including sharing some of my own difficulties, and then ways to maybe improve chances for success in each. So demonstrating productivity, probably this goes without saying, that you have to publish papers. Peer-reviewed papers are really considered to be the currency of an academic career. But I want to emphasize that it's not only the number of papers, but also the quality. So quality really matters. I think, unfortunately, it is seen as a numbers game. Having a large number of published papers is thought to be important for people who are, evaluating your dossier for tenure and or promotion. But I think that it's still really important to focus in on the quality of the work, more specifically than the number of papers. And that also sort of goes into some of the struggles or questions that you might have, such as, and these are things that Dr. Wirtz brought up yesterday in the keynote, whether to go for one big, amazing paper in that high impact factor journal in your field, and maybe in some fields that's literally impossible, versus publishing smaller publishable units. And then another question is how much of your focus should be shifted towards writing review papers, which would increase your citation count and help you get show a command of the literature compared to original research from your own lab. And then another question that he brought up is whether to submit to preprint servers or wait until the final paper comes out. And so I think that we have to be mindful about timing. You probably appreciate already that peer review, revisions, a second or third round of review, it takes time, right? And so we have to consider this when you're deciding what would be the best home for your work, and also whether to submit to a preprint server at the same time as you're submitting to the journal, just so that you can show this body of work coming to completion. You can cite it on your CV. You can also cite it in grant applications for NIH for sure. And so that's something to consider, is the timing. I also want to mention that you have to advocate for your paper while it's in review. So maybe this is something that your postdoc or your PhD advisor has been taking care of, but when you become the PI of your lab, right, I think that you cannot be afraid to check in on a paper that perhaps has been in review for a long time. Trust me, no one else is sitting around thinking, man, I wonder how long Stacey's paper has been in review. Like, no one is doing that. I have to advocate for my papers. You have to advocate for your own stuff. And so I think that that's a really important point that I wanted to mention here. My lab, we didn't get our first paper published until into my third year. And there's one sort of regret I have, which is not being an advocate for my paper, which we were trying to get into a more clinically focused journal, whereas my work is certainly more mathematical modeling. And so we submitted it. It got very constructive reviews, but the editor ended up rejecting the paper. And so I emailed the editor and said, what's the probability of me revising, resubmitting, and then maybe it eventually getting published here? And they said it's really low. Even though I knew this was a strong paper, I moved on to another journal, and it flew through the peer review process there. And I really sort of kicked myself, like, why didn't I push a little bit harder? Not to say that it's only the impact factor, the journal impact factor, that's important, but it would have allowed our paper to get broader visibility and go into a clinically focused journal and hopefully have some eventual translational benefit. And so I'm just giving you that example to say, that it's important that you advocate for your work and try to get it into the journal or the venue that is best suited for that body of work. Something that worked for me in considering the timeline of publication is to try to submit to journals that have special issues that are specific for your or relevant for your work. Usually they would have a defined publication date, and so that would limit the time that it would spend in the peer review process. And usually the editors for those special issues are motivated to move the process along. So that's maybe a little piece of advice that you could use to increase the chances of acceptance and also push the paper forward in a more faster way. So the second area in demonstrating productivity is funding, right? So go for all the funding, go for private opportunities from private foundations, go for federal funding. It's just really important to build a track record of research funding. You should realize that, some awards are considered to be more prestigious and carry more weight than others. So I think it's important to try to understand what your institution, what your school, what your department values. For example, in engineering, it's almost expected that you would apply for and hopefully receive the NSF Career Award or some other early career faculty federal grant. And in other fields, for example, receiving a Sloan Fellowship or a Packard Award is really important. And so it's a question about whether to go for that big grant or go for the smaller pots of money. And I say go for all of the grants that you think you would be competitive for, and even some of the ones that you don't, because you just never know. A lot of it is very stochastic. And so you want to just try to see what kind of proposals work and what ideas are really valued by the field. I have to admit that I submitted about 21 full proposals I know the exact number actually. I submitted 21 full proposals and letters of intent before receiving my first grant. And it was hard. It was really hard. I couldn't help but compare myself to others and wondering what I was doing wrong. But I have to say, right, that persistence is key. You have to keep applying. And I found for myself that honing in on the opportunities that were better suited for my kind of work, rather than applying for any and every grant towards my third and fourth year, was really a better strategy for me. And I also leveraged internal funding. So USC and other institutions I know for sure have a lot of pots of money that are available to faculty. And so if you can build up that track record of funding, even from institutional funds, it shows that you're worth investing in, and you can build on that and really exploit it to show external funders that you have ideas that are worth supporting. And then lastly, when we're thinking about more teaching-focused institutions, another area to demonstrate productivity in is in the classroom, right? So developing new courses, establishing new teaching practices. Again, it has to do with understanding some of the expectations for your institution, and then following the pieces of advice that you get from your mentors to say, okay, these are the ways in which I need to demonstrate productivity in my particular field. So the second piece is gaining recognition. So you're doing all this work, you're publishing these papers, you're getting grant funding. That's the first piece here. But you want to also be known for a particular area of research, and you want to be known outside of your institution. And so one way to do this is to go for different awards, right? So these have to often go through a nomination process, and there are a range of awards that you could be nominated for, including institutional awards, some from your professional society, and other national level awards. One thing to note is to take advantage of your early career status in the first few years, because very soon you will age out and you won't have that early career status anymore. And some of those opportunities will just literally go away. And so you want to take advantage of that status as much as you can. And what I suggest is just to keep a list and identify awards that you think it would be awesome to receive, study the profiles of previous awardees, and then map out a timeline of what you need to do to be competitive for those awards. And I want to put a little bit of an asterisk here, right? Focus on the written guidelines first, right? The written requirements, but don't count yourself out by assuming that there are some unwritten requirements. think that you have the potential to be competitive for those awards. And women tend to do this more often than their male counterparts. Is to say, oh well, I think that they're looking for something, a candidate like this, and so I shouldn't even apply because I don't meet that criteria. So don't count yourself out by assuming that there are some unwritten requirements. And also, don't wait to be nominated. If you think that you would be competitive for an award, reach out to potential nominators and ask them, will you consider nominating me for this award? Something that's really helped me is to talk to previous awardees using my network. If I don't know someone personally, try to find someone who knows someone who's been a previous awardee, and then talk with them and see if they have any suggestions about how to be competitive. Something that was hugely impactful for me, being a faculty here at USC, is that we have an awards office specifically in the School of Engineering. And so this is where there are full-time staff dedicated to identifying awards that faculty would be competitive for, and then putting together the nomination package. So they'll come to me even and say, Stacey, we think that you might be eligible for this award. Who do you think should be the letter writers? I give them the names, and they go off and coordinate the nomination package and materials. And so that has been really helpful. I know that that's not available at every institution, but you can sort of put together your own awards office by putting a list down, seeing what you would be competitive for, and then really working hard to reach out to mentors and advocates who can help nominate you for those awards. Another important piece of gaining recognition is to have a strong set of external letter writers who will write very amazing things about your awesome work, right? And so this is where you have to find and identify the people who would be most suitable for evaluating your work. This has to do with going up for promotion, right? Your institution is going to request external letter writers to describe and evaluate your work. And so you want to maybe pre-identify those people and get out in front of them. So go look for them at conferences, go to their talks, ask a question either right in the session or after the session, invite them to your department seminar series. Just find ways to make them aware of you and your work. When I was pre-tenure, someone suggested like sending my papers to them, which seemed really weird and intimidating. But now we can do that self-promotion of our papers and our research via Twitter, right? So it's super helpful. It's less intimidating. And I'll come back to this in a few slides, but it's just a great way to promote your work. What worked for me is inviting senior faculty to USC. That has been really helpful for me to get in front of them, to have dedicated one-on-one meeting time for me to allow my students to meet with them, so they just hear all of the things that are going on in my lab. And then also something that was extremely helpful in establishing that set of letter writers is participating as an ad hoc member for an NIH study section. So these are senior people in your field where you get to hear how they evaluate research, and they get to hear how you critically comment on proposals as well. And so I can say for a fact that some of those members of the study section that I had the chance to be a part of 2 times or 3 times were nominators for different awards, and also ended up maybe writing letters for my tenure package as well. And then lastly, invited talks, right? So this is important because you can also develop a track record of giving strong invited talks. Early on in your career, those early invitations, you're mostly going to be presenting work from your postdoc. But then as you evolve in your career and your papers start to come out and more people are inviting you, then you'll be able to decide like, which of these 5 stories do I want to present in this particular lecture? And so a way to do this is to really use your network, invite yourself. This works especially well if you have a friend or a colleague from a postdoc or from grad school that's at another institution. Offer to invite them to your department seminar series, and then see if they can invite you as well. Something else is when you give a talk maybe at a conference and someone says, oh, just in passing, it would be great to have you visit my institution. Follow up with them after the conference, send them an email. Oh, it's great to meet you. Thanks for coming to my talk. You mentioned maybe the possibility of inviting me out to your institution. I'm more than happy to do that. So let's think about dates when that can happen. I have a story of when I went to the Biomedical Engineering Society meeting. I gave a talk, which I thought was good. I saw the senior faculty member laughing. Literally, I thought he was laughing at my work. And I was like, man, that just didn't go as well as I thought it did. I ended up seeing him in the elevator at the conference hotel. And he said, you gave a really great talk and I would love to have you come out to my institution. And so I think he was just like maybe reading on his phone or something. And so it turned into a really great opportunity for me to go to that institution to give a talk. It turned out that he also had been successful in applying for an NIH grant that I was applying for, and he was very willing to send me his proposal. So that small interaction turned into something where now he's a mentor, an advocate for me, and so it's been a really nice interaction. I put this last point in parentheses since it's not too relevant right now, right? Physically traveling to another institution. But eventually, right, when we're able to travel more regularly again, you have to think about how much travel is feasible. You don't want to go off and give all these talks at the expense of building up your trainees, which I'm going to talk about next, and just making sure that you're maintaining progress in your research. So the third area is developing successful trainees, right? I think first we have to say you want to establish a positive lab culture. I think you have to prioritize the culture of your lab over having a full lab. You don't just want to have bodies or people sitting in the chairs and doing the work, right? You want to have the right people there. And so that goes when you're thinking about recruiting undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, technicians. All of those people are going to contribute positively or negatively to the lab culture that is being established. And so you have to really carefully think about how to establish a strong lab culture. I think you have to really hire the right people, and from the beginning, make your expectations clear. No one can read your mind. They don't know how much you want to see them in the lab or how much you want to get feedback from them or hear from them at various intervals of time about how their work is going. And so I think from experience, it's helpful, and from my experience, just to really make your expectations as clear as possible. I actually have a lab expectations document, so I can tell my trainees, potential trainees, what I expect from them, and also what they can expect from me, specifically like creating a respectful environment for them to do impactful research. So it goes both ways, but it helps for me to establish the standards of work in my lab and helps students who are considering my lab to make a more informed decision. So setting those expectations and vocalizing them is very important. I think all along the way, we have to continually try to improve our mentoring skills. Really, almost everything that I've discussed so far, you are not trained to do. You're trained to do research, you're trained to write papers, but you're not trained to hire people. You're not trained to be in HR and interact with people and try to put together really like a startup company. And so always considering how can you apply the right and unique mentoring approach for each student is important, and then working on your mentoring skills is especially important. I had a difficult decision in hiring someone, a postdoc, in the early part of my career, really my second year. I hired the wrong person. He really negatively impacted the lab. He ended up quitting after only staying for 5 months. And he said some very sexist and discriminatory words towards me. And then he published work from my lab without my consent, without including me on a co-author. And just thinking back, there were red flags that I overlooked because I thought that I just wanted to have someone in the lab working on this project. And so just you're going to have to, fumble through some of these things. But I think prioritizing the culture over having people there is really important. And then another aspect of developing successful trainees is just helping them to apply for fellowships, receive awards, and then ultimately job placement, right? That's really important. We know that our success as faculty members is directly correlated to our trainees' success or students who are in the classroom. And so helping them identify awards, and helping them move towards their own career goals, even if sometimes they might not be directly aligned with the labs, right? You're not going to always or ever be able to make another copy of yourself, right? And so you have to think about what do your students want to achieve and how can you guide them in the pursuit of those goals. Again, you can also use your network, be an advocate, and help identify different opportunities. And then the fourth point is to use your position to affect change. So in this way, you can impact your field, maybe by serving to review journal articles, helping with conference organization and reviewing abstracts, reviewing research proposals as well. These are all things, ways that you can impact your field and use your position. For grant review panels, there's an NIH early career researcher program or reviewer program, but you can't be too early in your career, right? They almost expect you to have a grant before you can review a grant, which is like chicken before the egg. But what I suggest is just to reach out to the scientific review officer or the staff person who runs the review panel and offer and volunteer your time. Also, you can ask your postdoc or PhD advisors to maybe suggest your name when they can't participate in the panel. And then you also want to consider leadership and service. So this word choice came from my PhD advisor. So don't just consider service opportunities, but ways in which you can demonstrate leadership in those service opportunities. That can happen at the institutional level, within your professional society. You will, though, have to begin to optimize which opportunities to pursue, right, to try to consider the impact and the visibility as well as the workload. And then lastly, right, we have the unique opportunity, I think, to do broader outreach and advocacy and using our position and our privilege of being in academia and being in higher education in many different ways. And so it's a personal choice, but I think that there are ways that we can really take advantage of the positions that we're in and the access that we have to influence other people. And I just have a bonus here, which is to establish an online presence. I already mentioned Twitter, but of course, maintaining a research website is really important. And Twitter, again, is a huge network to tap into. Tweet the papers that you've read, tweet and highlight papers from your lab and do what's called a tweetorial. You can live tweet conferences when you're in a great session and also, right, emphasizing and bringing attention to talks from your lab. And then taking part in virtual communities such as Slack and other online communities that can help you gain a sense of belonging in a time where, or a career where it's pretty isolating. And so I think that's something that I didn't appreciate early on, that I would want to connect with other people who are on the same sort of pursuit as I am. And that has been immensely helpful, being in, for example, the new PI Slack. And now I'm in mid-career Slack, PI Slack. So that's nice too. So just to summarize here, demonstrating productivity, gaining recognition for your work, developing successful trainees, and then using your position to affect change in different ways, I think are all aspects that are involved in being promoted and being successful. And so that's really where I'll end. I think we can take some questions, but I wanted maybe to just preempt one question that I see has been raised in different ways. And that is sort of how to pursue a faculty position when maybe you're wanting to start a family, or you're already have a family, have a small child or multiple small children. And so I thought that maybe I would give just for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, a little bit of my perspective on that. When I was applying for faculty positions, and then when I went on several interviews, I was 7 months pregnant. Andrea can attest to this, as can many people in my department here at USC. And so I went about it in a way that I couldn't hide. I couldn't hide this huge pregnant belly. But my husband and I, my spouse and I, had already decided to sort of be as open as possible, because family is hugely important to me. And that's sort of why I put on one of the first slides that disclaimer that success in career is not equal to success in life. And I want to be successful in both. I want to be an amazing mom to my children. I have 3 young children, one that you probably can hear, he's a year and a half old, and two older daughters, 7 and 9. And so I want to make sure that it's not a balance. It's never going to be a perfect balance, but I try to take it in waves. So there are times when I'm really focused in on things that are happening in my lab and in work, and other times when I'm more focused on family life. And so what I want to encourage you by saying is that it's possible to do all the things. Not all the things at the same time, but you can do many things, right? There are many facets to your life. And I think that you have to sort of decide when you're applying for faculty positions, when to make those personal aspects of your life more visible, either to the department chair or other people in the department, so that they can understand, right, that success for you does not come at the expense of other aspects of your life. And so I'm happy to answer more questions about that. I've been on both the applying side, but also on the faculty search side, and I've seen it go, really well and be really successful. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that too. But I really thank you for joining in, and maybe we can have more time to chat as well.
So I'm going to ask you one question because we're slightly over.
Yeah.
But first off, that was an amazing presentation. You covered a ton of ground. So now I'm going to have to pick one. This is going to be super hard. I'll do two really fast. So at what point do you age out of early career status, or how long does it last?
Yeah, that's a quick question. I think it's mainly once you get tenure, once you're no longer an assistant professor, then you're really not eligible for most of the early career awards.
So how do you pick reference letter writers for assistant professor applications? Are the recommendations to always take PhD advisor, professor advisor? And then how do you, moving forward in life, how do you pick recommendation letters for awards, for other things? So basically, how do you pick who writes recommendation letters for you when?
Yeah, so I think when you're applying for your faculty positions, it really makes sense to have your PhD advisors, either if you have multiple, as well as your postdoc advisors, because they can speak to your body of work, they can speak to the rigor of your science and the impact of it as well. And so those are the really immediate choices. And then if there's also one or two or more people who are on your defense committee or other people who you've collaborated with as a postdoc, I think those are really nice choices as well, because they can talk to about your research from a different perspective, not from the person who's advising you and mentoring you, but from a collaborative sense. And so those are the, I think, decisions that make sense when you're applying for jobs. When you're trying to be nominated for awards, I think you have to sort of identify people who are senior in your field, but also are pretty well known, right? Because you want to show that you're highly valued by someone who also your field values and who your field appreciates. And so it is a little bit of a strategic pursuit to find the right profile of the nominator. And so I think I have like a list of people who would be really good for some awards, but maybe another list who would be good for another type of award. So it sort of depends on the award, the visibility, the level of it, and then the person also that could be nominating you, their visibility and their stage in the field as well. Awesome.
So thank you very much for your time this morning. I know that you're super busy, and you also have a small toddler. So thank you. I really appreciate it.